Wendy and Scott and I are going to feel very real. Okay, so we're live. Welcome everybody to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It is frighteningly the 5th of April. It's Tesha Bus's birthday. Very exciting. We are here addressing a bill that has come to us from the House, H55, an act relating to miscellaneous unemployment insurance amendments. And so we're going to sort of tee us up and give us the big picture view of what this bill does. We have the reporter of the bill, Representative Mulvaney Stanek. So welcome. It's good to have you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. This is my first visit to Senate Economic Development.
Oh.
It's very exciting since maybe 20 years ago when I was a near baby advocate on issues. So for your record, I'm State Representative Emma Mulvaney Stanek. I was the reporter of H55 for House Commerce and Economic Development. And what I will do is provide maybe just a little bit of context on the why the House Commerce took up this bill, a little brief history about our deliberations on it, and of course leave it, hopefully most of the technical stuff, to very capable Damian Leonard on the bill itself. So H55 is actually the effort of merging two bills we grappled with, H55 and H92, and we put it all into H55. So it includes 5 components between those two bills. The first big component is requiring all nonprofit employers to participate in the unemployment system regardless of the number of employees they have as of July 1st, 2024. And so this was born out of some realizations, certainly by policymakers through the pandemic, that people who work for a nonprofit with 3 or fewer employees are not required to pay into the unemployment system. And so, and many Vermonters actually, frankly, aren't aware of that.
Right. I wasn't.
Law does not preclude, of course, a small nonprofit from contributing into the system, but many do not, because it's not required. It is something that the federal government allows states to do, and Vermont has opted so far to be one of those states that doesn't make that requirement. But during the pandemic, as I mentioned, as people rushed to access federal programs that were stood up, PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, for example, and others, they realized they were not eligible because their underlying eligibility did not allow them to access those programs. So there was a gap, and we heard from constituents about the economic challenge that was for people. And so when we came back and as we're emerging out of the pandemic, we've been looking at a lot of elements of the unemployment system and how to improve it, and work with the department, of course, as we navigate what we can and cannot do now with the mainframe construct, which maybe we'll get into it, maybe we won't. So I won't have PTSD.
We've already got
in the room. We won't go there. It's fine. Take a deep breath. We will prevail one day. We thought this was an important equity issue to make sure that all employees, regardless of what size nonprofit, large nonprofits are required to be in the unemployment system, that we would make equity across the board. So we heard testimony. I know Common Good Vermont is in the room today. We've heard testimony and work with partners to really make sure that we had a long enough on-ramp, if you will, into that program. The second component of H55 is helping to build that longer on-ramp, which would direct the Department of Labor to develop and implement an educational outreach effort with partners, working with Common Good Vermont and others to make sure that nonprofits are well educated on what the employment system is. It is complicated, what the options are between being a taxable employer or a reimbursable employer, and the fiscal implications of that and how to financially plan. We also heard, of course, nonprofits have varying fiscal years and need, if they're small, similarly, if they have less than 3 employees, that's a bigger fiscal reality to plan for. So we wanted to make sure we gave them adequate time. In the course of the testimony on those components, small municipal employers in general are also required to be reimbursable employers under state law. And so what that means is that it's just a different taxing system way that they pay into the system. But we heard from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns that a lot of small municipal employers also challenged to know all the technicalities of it all and would benefit from some of that educational work as well from the Department of Labor. So we added them into this education outreach effort.
Right. You wonder that isn't that VLCT's job?
They're going to be a partner in the outreach part. So I think and I'm sure that the department can testify to what they have in mind so far, but it's a lot around technical assistance and making sure that there's adequate information out there about how to, what do these two categories mean, and for the municipal employers who have to be a reimbursable employer, how do they actually interface with the program and
Got it.
you know, the
Yes,
impact?
because they are all nonprofits also. I mean,
Nonprofits have the option between the two, and municipals have to just use the reimbursable category.
And what
So
are the two categories?
taxable employer and reimbursable employer.
Taxable and reimbursable.
Taxable employer is basically the option to pay in like any not regular, but employer who's not a nonprofit, which is you pay quarterly based on the base wages and the use of the system by any former employees who are eligible for unemployment. And there's a whole formula, and it's based on usage, it's based on your overall payroll, et cetera. And that's much more predictable because you pay quarterly throughout the system, or throughout the year, sorry. And then reimbursable is more like pay as you go, to really shorthand it here, where it's you pay as someone uses it, but in a small nonprofit or a small employer for a municipality, that can be a big chunk of money depending on how long someone's on unemployment. And so it's just knowing the differences so that the employer can adequately plan.
okay, great. And the third component.
And the third component, yeah, you see how I frame it, 5 things. Number 3, okay. Number 3 is a technical correction to the mathematical formula that we use for the supplemental unemployment benefit that we put into law last biennium. And it's an attempt to align it with our original legislative intent.
That's our $25.
In part, yes. And I'm gonna let Damien answer that one because I had this down for my floor report and I lost a little sleep of getting really correct on the technical stuff. I can go there, but I'm gonna also phone a friend on that one.
Yeah, it began in this committee, and so we're happy to deal with that with you.
We're essentially making sure that at the end of the day, when the $100 million that we committed to putting into the pockets of claimants is paid fully and completely and not more and not less. That's my very shorthand answer of telling you the why.
How exact.
There we go.
Good.
And the mathematical formula is above my pay grade. Okay, number 4. Ready? Number 4. Okay, and number 4 gets into number 4 and 5 get into what was in the spirit of H92, which was a bill that I introduced this session, which gets into studying, and it's another learning out of the pandemic. But to start looking, in case I'm looking at you too, what we wound up doing in H55 is to study the impact of expanding unemployment eligibility to include urgent and compelling circumstances for the reason why someone would separate from employment. So right now, if you had an unexpected loss of childcare or had to care for a sick family member, and or you were ill or injured yourself, you can't access unemployment. Meaning, if you ran out all your sick leave, and we can talk about paid leave too, if that's a question people have, which came up in our deliberations. But if you run out of all of it, right, and you have no more leave, and your employer's like, well, I'm sorry, I'm a small employer, and I'm sorry that your partner has cancer, but we can't give you any more paid leave. We're going to have to, this isn't going to work anymore. And you have to end employment. It's not necessarily voluntary, but it's considered a voluntary quit under unemployment law, and you can't access unemployment. So what this would do under urgent and compelling circumstances would allow someone to start to collect unemployment once they are able and available to apply for work again. So wouldn't it be immediate? Because in theory, you lost your job, you're supporting your spouse or whatever with cancer. But once you are able, through that crisis, you found childcare, the person hopefully has healed enough, et cetera, and you're ready to return to the workforce, this would allow a Vermonter to be able to access unemployment, to have a little bit of economic support until they can find that job to return to the workforce. This is done in a number of states. And this again is a study in H55. Because we did not have time to really get specific information about the impact on the unemployment trust fund or the number of people it would necessarily impact by the time we needed to move this bill. But I will flag that Vermont Legal Aid provided some really useful testimony in this, and I would encourage you to have them in because they of course support a lot of folks navigating unemployment. And they estimated over the course of, I don't have the statistic right in front of me, over the past several years, they had somewhere between 7 to 15 or so people this would benefit. So they don't think this would be a very large number. And on the other side, Department of Labor, of course, wants to be protective of the unemployment trust fund's health, obviously, we all do. So we just realized there's a range, but we don't know what that range is. So this study would help us find that information. Right. The Joint Fiscal Office would also be a helpful partner in this, in understanding that piece.
So noted, we have legal aid coming in already.
Great, they would be helpful on this. And I also just note that for some of these elements, these were eligible reasons to use pandemic-related unemployment programs on the sudden loss of childcare, et cetera. So we've seen the benefit to Vermonters on this, and this is a great place for us to explore. And finally, number 5 would be another report, but it's a piece that came out of exploring, again, elements of H92, which one of those other urgent and compelling reasons would be if you were trying to escape domestic or sexual violence, to be able to access unemployment. We currently have our own state program, and I say our own because it's not funded by the UI Trust Fund formally. It's not funded by, well, I'm not gonna get super technical, basically general fund dollars that's a pass through AHS. But we have our own money that we provide to fund what's called the domestic, it's a long name, Domestic and Sexual Violence Survivors Transitional Employment Program, which essentially is a program that if a Vermonter is able to note that that is the reason for separation of employment, they can access that special fund to get on unemployment until they can find work and work out their life, hopefully to find a safe, to be in a safer place for employment and life in general. So this program has been severely underutilized over the years, so much that it ranges between 0 to 5 people at any particular time throughout the year. And as we heard from the Vermont Network in testimony, they just last year, they gave a statistic that they've received almost 20,000 calls between all of their network partners around people just inquiring about, I'm trying to escape sexual abuse or domestic abuse or whatnot. And they also said that 99% of cases of abuse, economic control is used as a way to really keep those folks in those situations. So it's clearly underutilized. There's many more people who would benefit. And so this would be a study to figure out ways to improve the program. And we think it's very worthwhile. And I will also note that just a moment of praise to the department, they've already added a screening question when people call and inquire about unemployment to make sure that they're a little more upfront, that are you separating from employment because of an issue related to domestic or sexual violence or abuse. And they've already been able to track several people into this program, potential applicants. So clearly there's more we can do to make sure that this is a program that's really well known throughout the state and used.
That's great. Do we know what's in the special fund right now?
There's about $25,000, but it rolls over, and this is a technical piece as well. I'm going to kick to my friend over at Department of Labor because we are just on the cusp of trying to explore more how much is in there, how much would we need. Maybe there's some changes for next biennium to explore.
Right, and there are other victims funds too that
Yes.
we might. It strikes me that we should look at all those victims funds together and figure out how they can work better together.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. This is great.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So just 2 questions. So on the sexual abuse and domestic violence, so this payment is just for leaving a job, the unemployment. It's not for anything else.
Correct. This is the unemployment support element of it. So there might be other victim support funds, but they're housing.
Right.
This is not my world, but I imagine there's other things that you could get support through other AHS.
Yeah, but-
I imagine.
Right. So did you talk about those other things? I'm just thinking about people who don't have a job.
Sure. Well, this would be fundamentally be based on.
There are other funds for victims.
Right.
There are other funds for that.
I would ask this of the policy director, Cameron Wood here, who's to my left, just about what it actually covers, but it's essentially unemployment benefits based on their base wages, I imagine.
Okay.
To help them pay the bills, obviously, until they find a new job or transition. There, I believe there's some additional, I don't know what the right technical word is, but some additional softening of the rules, because of the reality is it may take longer to relocate, and some other elements that would not be applicable to someone who's not escaping abuse who would be on unemployment. So hence this special fund that we've established, so we're not having to follow some of the more stricter rules by the federal government that dictates what states can do with UI Trust Fund dollars. Anyway,
Exactly.
good question for Cameron for more.
Okay,
details.
that's really helpful. And then just one other question. At the beginning, I'm really surprised, and I feel like I should have known that nonprofits aren't required to participate. And is it all, or was there a threshold
No.
of
It's 3. It's a
3 or
1,
less.
3 or fewer.
3 or less? That's quite a lot of organizations.
That's a lot of our nonprofits.
Right. So
I
then,
actually, okay.
I'm sorry.
No, I did. I have a question about that too when you're done.
So do
Yeah,
you
I
want
would
to
just-
save some
well-
of these for Damien?
Well, but if there's anything, I mean, we're only seeing you once. So if there's anything you want us to know more about that.
Sure, I'm always happy to come back, but yes. So essentially, when we were hearing testimony from Vermonters, it was really out of the pandemic, right? Because I think largely most people don't know, right, that they're not eligible. in Vermont. And this is not the case in other states. They've included nonprofits, all nonprofits, I should say. These small ones. So and I think the biggest piece we heard back from nonprofits themselves and those who represent nonprofits is that really it's not necessarily that folks are opposed to being included, it's that there needs to be adequate time and consideration to help those small employers essentially plan financially to be part of the system and to know what it means and to know what the obligations are. It's not an easy system to understand, and most of these small nonprofits, if they even have someone doing HR, it's not a big piece of their job. So we just wanted to make sure that we were being fair in that long on-ramp to bring people aboard.
Okay, and actually, Keisha, I just have one more. I'm just concerned with small organizations having HR knowledge in general.
Sure.
I mean, that's a big issue. So I would hope maybe that when this if this effort does go through, we can either use it as a model, keep the contacts, update the website, to provide other HR information.
Yes, one of the things we really, in that attempt to make sure there's a robust outreach effort, is to also partner with the Secretary of State's office with no nonprofits that register at least, to make sure we're doing our best to push that information out, and again, work with our partners like.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Great
this
idea.
is a challenge that we face with our big nonprofit partners. So that is what we would hope.
Thank you.
Yes.
And it's wonderful to see us acting on things we have learned that have bubbled up and become issues we know we need to address from COVID. So it's great to be addressing this, because we all worked on these issues during the course of the last 3 years. So thank you.
And I think Keisha had it.
Okay, Sean, sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Representative Mulvaney Stanton, for coming in. I think we're kind of discombobulated in here a little bit. So glad you just sort of helped us understand all the pieces of this bill. We would have probably reached out to you much later in the process otherwise. I'm trying to better understand the nonprofit piece, because it seemed like some larger nonprofits also had an issue where it was, I don't know if it was optional for them, but they were supposed to be self-insuring. I heard this from, for example, the YMCA. They asked for help because they were supposed to be preparing for an unemployment event and they hadn't fully. And so then they kind of asked for a bailout, and it was like, I thought you were supposed to be doing something on your own. So I don't know, if we went deeper into the larger nonprofits, or if the common good person could speak to that, but even the larger nonprofits seem to be unprepared to offer unemployment support without hollowing out their own budgets, because it was like almost an ERISA type of voluntary self-insurance.
Right, and this is, I'll just briefly mention that we did try to explore, originally in H55, there was this concept of bonding as one of the many elements that would help with nonprofit employers being able to prepare if they were to have, I don't know, they lost a massive grant and they had to lay off a significant number of people, or they're very tiny, and even laying off one person would be a significant impact on the budget. So I'm not sure about the self-insurance part, but we explored the bonding, but that we heard feedback and testimony that was because it was a requirement of bonding in the original bill as drafted, and that felt onerous to nonprofits, as I recall from testimony. But I'm sure that Cameron and Damien can speak more to that. I think the biggest part we heard was that if people had adequate education and time to fiscally plan and knew that they could choose the taxable employer option, not small nonprofits or big nonprofits, that actually spreads out payments in a more predictable manner. Not saying it takes the burden away, but that spreads it out much more than being a reimbursable employer, which it could be a big bill not out of nowhere, because they know they're laying someone off or someone's separating, but it could be a big financial impact. So that's, again, part of why the education piece is so key.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Keisha or Wendy, before we walk through with Damien?
One last plug I'll just say is that when you look at the piece around urgent and compelling, we did not have enough time, but I know Joint Fiscal Office and the Department of Labor was perhaps working on what is possible for knowing if we can answer this question about the impact part sooner rather than later. Because if we can answer it now, I don't know why we would need a study. We could just call the question on the policy under the underlying policy question of, do we expand for these particular reasons? So that's just my little plug.
That's your plug for the Senate to do that additional work.
Please and thank
We
you.
love it when the House comes to
And
us
I'm
and
happy
they fix
to
this
bring back
for
to
us.
Commerce to fix anything you need us to fix. So you just let me know.
Well, we've sent you plenty of things you need to work on.
Yes,
So
please and thank you.
we look forward to Commerce's good work.
Yes.
On our bills. Randy, do you have any questions for Emma before we depart? Okay, great. Emma,
I do
thank
not.
you so much. This was terrific. It's good to have Aisha and Randy both up there. Thank you. This was terrific. Thank you for teeing it up, and we're going to get hopefully get Marcotte to come and tee up the workers' comp piece.
Great. I'm gonna run upstairs, but I'm
Great.
my trusted intern here to.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
terrific. Thank you very much. Damien, let us now address the bill itself fully as in a walkthrough. Yeah. Okay, great, perfect. Perfecto.
Good morning. For the
Good
record,
morning.
Damian Leonard, Legislative Counsel. So before I do the walkthrough, I just want to stop everybody. I heard the word ERISA used in reference to unemployment insurance. ERISA does not apply to unemployment insurance. So when an employer self-insures, and we do call it self-insuring, they're responsible for figuring out how to pay. If they're a reimbursable employer, they're responsible for figuring out how to budget for and pay that reimbursable amount. Some employers do take out some sort of insurance policy or set aside money in a fund. Others don't. Part of the problem with the pandemic is because of the way experience rating works, so it's the first 4 of the last 5 calendar quarters, is attributable to the employers. So you could have had an employee who worked for the YMCA in Burlington a year ago, and those wages that they earned, and then the unemployment that they're paid on those wages is now attributable to the YMCA. So the YMCA, they left the YMCA for a higher paying job somewhere else. That job laid them off because the pandemic pressure put on that job forced them to be laid off. Now the YMCA is not getting just 1 or 2 of those, but they're getting a dozen or 2 dozen of those because suddenly we had this huge influx of unemployment. So that's what happened for a lot of the nonprofit employers, is they had a very small amount set aside that dealt with their historical unemployment experience. And suddenly they were faced with these bills that were significantly higher than they'd had before. And so even if they had been preparing, their preparation wasn't for a worst case scenario, it was for an average year or something like that. And obviously I can't speak to all employers, but I think a lot of the problems we saw was because that bill that came in was way, way outside of the historical norm, even compared to the 2008 recession. I mean, we all remember the spike in unemployment claims that the department experienced. I mean, it went from here to way up there, higher than highest that we've ever seen, Cameron. Yeah, so is that, I mean, and just imagine that if you're trying to budget and set aside money, that's going to blow your budget every time if you have that, once in a millennium type, event. Hopefully once in a millennium, or at least once every 100 years, it's going to blow your budget if you haven't prepared for a once every 100 years event.
Right, and that would be true for both the taxable and reimbursable.
Well, so with the taxable, what happens is your tax rate changes, and then so it's a longer payback period. This is the challenge with reimbursable, is it's an immediate payback.
Right.
And it's the full amount versus taxable. It gets smoothed out over a number of years. And if you remember what we did for taxable employers, which we couldn't do for reimbursable, is we said when we're writing the formula next year, ignore 2020. It was 2020, right? That we ignored?
Yeah.
Okay. So we said ignore that year because it's so out of the ordinary, it would have thrown off our formula for a decade.
Right, I remember
So,
those discussions.
yeah, but we can't do that for reimbursable because when you're reimbursable, you have to pay the bill. That's the deal when you sign up for reimbursable. And normally that means that you have a quarterly cost of 0 or something relatively low. But when you have it otherwise. So, but yeah, I wanted to make sure we didn't go down the road of ERISA, because unemployment insurance is specifically exempted from the ERISA requirements. So it's specifically separate. Whenever we're talking unemployment insurance or workers' compensation, ERISA is not involved. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind. Even though we may use some of the terms from ERISA like self-insuring, I just want to make sure we don't go there, because ERISA gets us into a really complicated, challenging and confusing area of the law.
Right.
And here we're talking about something where there isn't a lot of guidance in the state law about how the employers budget for this. It's kind of up to them. And that we'll return to in, I think, section 4 of the bill. So turning to the bill in front of you.
Okay. Great.
Section 1
And, yeah.
is a definitional change. We're adding 2 new, more inclusive definitions of different family members. The first is son, daughter, and child. And it's a biological child, foster child, adoptive child, stepchild, a child for whom the individual is listed as a parent on the child's birth certificate, a legal ward of the individual, a child of the individual's spouse, or a child that the individual has day-to-day responsibilities to care for and financially support. The caveat to this language is that we rarely reference son, daughter, or child in the unemployment statutes. The primary reference is with respect to child support payments. So that this more expansive definition would apply throughout. And this comes out of some language from Representative Mulvaney Stanik's bill, which was looking for more inclusive language. And so we tailored both of these to what actually appears in the statutes. And I just wanted to add the caveat that that is used very little outside of the child support payment recovery sections. Spouse would include a domestic partner or a civil union partner. My understanding is that the department is already doing that. And so this is just codifying that in statute. So if you've never gotten a legal marriage, but you have a domestic partnership, or you have a civil union that you never changed to a legal marriage, this just says you're included in the term spouse.
So I have a question about that, because we have legal term, what's the time frame for a domestic partner? I mean, what's the legal framework for a domestic partner? I mean, we have a legal framework for spouses, and we have a legal framework for civil unions, but there, as far as I know, we have civil law merit, partnerships that are acknowledged in law after 7 years, I believe. But there, as far as I know, I mean, why do we have a legal construct for domestic partner?
We do actually, in election law, we define domestic partner quite clearly, and you have to have been cohabitating for at least 6 months. And then there are other factors. And when we do the more in-depth walkthrough of H66, you'll see that that same definition is applied to that law.
So it's cohabiting for 6 months or
cohabiting for 6 months, and then other factors. What's worth saying is that this bill does not specifically spell out what domestic partner means. So one of the questions that might be a good question for Cameron is, does it make more sense for the department to do that through rulemaking, or to spell it out in the statute? And so, because right now,
that as a question, Cameron.
So hint,
Yeah.
Right now, because it's silent on exactly what we mean by domestic partner,
And
it would be left up to the commissioner to make that determination, and the Employment Security Board adopts rules for unemployment insurance, so they could adopt a rule, or they could just have a procedural determination as to what their threshold is.
Yeah, I mean, we define all these other relationships in statute. It does make some sense. And we have a domestic partner defined in statute and election law. But given that we're now using it with regularity in both our paid family leave law and in childcare, I assume, and in UI and language, I think it may make some sense to do it
and
statutorily, but I don't know what counts.
Right, and in our crime victim statute, we also say to qualify as a domestic partner, a couple shall cohabitate for at least 6 months, be 18 years of age, not married to anyone else, and not be related by blood closer than would bar marriage under state law, which is a slightly looser definition than what's applied to all of you for purposes of disclosures under election law.
Right, which is where it came up initially.
So-
But as the number of domestic partners grows, I think it behooves us to actually, sorry, I didn't mean to take us down.
Nope,
this rabbit
that's
hole,
fine.
But I do think we need to define it.
Yep.
I'm more fully for these sections.
So
let's just note.
either way, though, we do have a couple of places where we define it, and typically
Yeah.
it means cohabitating for at least 6 months. You're not allowed to be more closely related than you know, so closely related that you couldn't get married, et cetera.
Yep, got it.
So the
So-
second section
Yeah.
also amends the definition section, but it takes effect a year later. And this would amend the definition section. The key language, you're going to see this is a really long section. Most of what we're doing are technical changes to clean up references that were obsolete before I was born.
Yikes, I should have had this in our bill yesterday.
Between that and your birthday, we have some good
Yeah,
points of reference.
so. Yes.
Maybe obviously before he was born, but maybe not.
Not
before I
probably
was
not,
born.
you know me,
Mm,
Mhm.
but anyway.
Yep, so, but anyway, so the key language starts on the bottom of page 3.
I was gonna say.
On line 20, we strike out the requirement that to be subject to the unemployment law, a nonprofit has to have 4 or more individuals in its employment for at least 20 different weeks during the year.
Right.
So, and now it will apply to all nonprofits.
Is there any other group that's not included?
Yes, there are a number of different employers and types of employment that are excluded from unemployment insurance law. Small agricultural employment, domestic employment, employment on certain seafaring vessels, employment by foreign governments. Yeah, the list is long.
But the agricultural and domestic, we actually just,
Well, we did
Work
that
with.
with, they were. we
So that's
enabled
for
them to-
collective bargaining, not
Yeah.
for unemployment.
right, no, I understand, but
So-
those are groups that we're thinking
Yes.
about.
We've already discussed this year.
Right,
So, okay, so they're
and
not,
it gets complicated. There are some things that federal law prohibits us from covering altogether. There are some things like nonprofits where federal law says you have to cover nonprofits with 4 or more employees. And then you may cover with fewer than 4 employees. And so that's one where we were doing the bare minimum. This would bring us in line with the smaller portion of states that have expanded this to all nonprofits.
okay, that's helpful.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
You
just.
mentioned there were some employers that are excluded by federal law. Can you give us a sense of what kinds of employers those are?
I could, if I had a minute to reference it. Cameron, do you want to take that? Yeah, if you give me 2 seconds. I'm going to the Federal Department of Labor's website. So,
Randy, your question again is what other employers are
Yep.
not included?
Yeah, so for example, agricultural labor, an employing unit that paid less than $20,000 in wages during during all of the calendar quarters in the past year, or employed fewer than 10 workers during the year.
But that's most of Vermont business.
That could be a lot of Vermont agricultural employers are exempt. Domestic service is any employer that paid wages in cash of $1,000 or more for domestic service in a private home, local college club, or local chapter of a college fraternity or sorority. If you remember the days when fraternities and sororities had their own cooks, etc. Yep.
Seen movies at least, yeah.
It does also exempt independent contractors. Just see if I can find a better.
Independent contractors with no employees. Independent contractors as individuals.
Yes, independent contractors as individuals.
Okay.
Just see here.
Seafaring vessels I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, hold on. I'm finding a better list here that'll be a little quicker to access. I'm sorry, I'm not finding a good list right off the top of my bat, but I can come back with a list.
Let's come back.
It is out there, and I will get you the list.
Right, and then Randy will be here too. So why don't we keep moving through this?
So, yeah, I'll probably just have to go into the statute to pull up the list. I thought there was a quick reference on DOL's website. Yeah. All right, good. It's not just me. So the section 3 is the taxable wage base language, and the subsection C of that section relates to the option for nonprofit organizations to become reimbursable employers. Most of this is technical changes, correcting terms, and deleting dates that are now decades, obsolete by decades, including, like the opt-in period from 1972. So most of this is just cleanup to clarify the statute.
It looks like it. Looks like a lot of cleanup.
Yes. And if we look down here.
So 21 title 21 is all unemployment insurance.
No, it's all labor.
All labor,
employment
right.
costs. So 21 VSA chapter 17 is unemployment insurance.
Got it. And when was the last time we did, having just done the technical corrections, Bill, I'm just
We-
curious, when was the last time we cleaned up Title 21? Forget it.
Never.
Never.
So there was
That's on
a
our
wage
list.
and hour cleanup bill that was not reintroduced this year. Now that Representative Kalaki is no longer with us. We have never done one for unemployment insurance, but I would embrace the opportunity. My concern is that the amount of time required for the department and I to work through it would be difficult.
To say the least.
To say the least. It's a summer project, and I don't know that the department has the resources to commit to it because it is a long, time-consuming process of sending drafts back and forth and researching language to make sure that we're not, particularly with unemployment compensation, to make sure that we're not inadvertently taking the state out of compliance with some arcane, obscure federal requirement.
I get that. Maybe we should continue this conversation with Anthea and Jen and figure out how we put on the wish.
Yeah, this would be,
Timeframe.
this would be outside of the technical corrections.
Yeah, no,
bill,
I
'cause
know.
it's such a, this would be more like the miscellaneous judiciary corrections bill or something like
Right.
that.
Okay,
So
so,
this-
or a total rewriting.
Yeah,
of
or
Title-
like we did
like
with
we did
Title
with
VII.
Title VII.
But it, you know, Title VII, just to give you a sense, that
That's so
was,
cute.
that was a 144-page bill for that title. And that took 3 or 4 months of work on the back end before the session started,
I know.
with lots of, like, each chapter was multiple drafts back and forth between the department and myself. With this one, we're talking about only one chapter, but this is, I mean, the definitions are 43 pages by themselves. So this would be a
So,
hundreds of pages long bill.
but we know we need to do it. So, or we know we probably need to do it. So I think I'd just like to put it as a pin to
Mhm.
discuss with Jen or with you about when we would do it, and what has to be in place for us to bother to take the time.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't want to speak for the department, but I mean, they would need to have someone who could dedicate significant time.
Oh, yeah. No, I get it.
And then, you know,
Okay.
it,
Just noted. I think
but
it's something
it
we
would
should.
be good to do. I mean,
Yeah.
what we've been doing at this point is piecemeal.
Yeah.
As we get a
So that's what
section,
we're
I
doing
try
here.
to do this.
This is a piecemeal
Yeah.
update.
So what you'll see on page 12, in the middle of the page, is that we had 2 subdivisions that were essentially duplicative. And I've struck out all the duplicative language
Wow,
and
there we
boiled
are.
it down to an explanation of how you calculate who's responsible for what benefits
Got it.
during the base period. And then there is a section here on page 13 on group accounts. So reimbursable employers can create a group account whereby multiple nonprofits will become part of a group account, and then they would share liability for unemployment benefits through that group account. I don't know the extent to which this is utilized, but it is an option out there.
It's a great option.
There is another option out there where they can make estimated payments once they become a reimbursable employer, much the same way you do with self-employment income. And then at the end of the year, they have a true up. Again, I don't know the extent to which anyone's taking that option. It's like a hybrid of taxable and reimbursable employer. And I've already skipped past that section in the technical.
Right, but I see that you
corrections,
did
but-
updating on that too.
Yeah, I've
Okay.
just, this is all
I-
technical changes.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't want to take us down that, but I just see how much you're rewriting this.
Yeah,
title,
and
I
so
just was
with
curious.
this, I mean, you know, the way to think about it is we've probably knocked off 400 words that were obsolete or duplicative
Which is
in here,
always
which is
satisfying.
helpful for anyone who's trying to read the statute.
Totally.
You don't lose your way going, wait, didn't I read this already? What's different about this paragraph?
Nope, this is what we need to be doing all the time.
So, but yeah, so those changes there are no real substantive changes in that section.
Section
We
three.
had originally, the original draft had a bonding requirement that nonprofits secure a bond or other security to ensure payment of benefits. That was taken out in the House because the cost of that would have been prohibitive for a lot of our small nonprofits. And the complexity of that, and it would have been administratively complex for the department too. So at the end of the day, as Representative Mulvaney Stanek said, the House reached the conclusion that really education about how to do reimbursable and what your potential liability was and how the system works is really a better approach than saying you need to do bonding, because what some other states have seen that have done that is that
Sorry, I was in the
the bonding requirement actually ends up deterring nonprofits from electing the reimbursable option at all. So section 4 is the education and outreach that Representative Mulvaney-Stanek discussed. This starts on the bottom of page 15.
Oh my gosh, so section 3 goes all the way to page 15.
Yes, it does.
There are lots of
This
things.
gives you a sense of just how long a technical corrections bill for unemployment would be.
Oh, yeah.
It would probably be a 400 or 500 page bill, is my guess.
Which was what last year's technical corrections.
Yes, which would be a good project for multiple summers, but I think yeah, it would be extremely time consuming.
So section
The-
4 on page 15.
Section 4 on page 15. This requires the department, in consultation with the League of Cities and Towns, Common Good Vermont, United Way of Northwest Vermont, and other interested stakeholders.
Excuse me for 1 second. He is on the screen in the committee. He's right there.
Also, he's not in Montpelier.
He's not in Montpelier. He is going to Beta.
Or Burlington.
One interest center for Rock.
I don't know if anyone got ice. We didn't get ice here, but last night there were all kinds of warnings about
Yeah.
ice storms.
And we have a bunch of people out today who are working from home because they're getting an exciting opportunity to go to Beta and meet the president's wife, Jill Biden, who's going to be doing something. So we have lucky senators who are doing that, Randy being one of them. Sorry, so.
So
section-
anyway, the department with the League of Cities and Towns, Common Good Vermont, United Way of Northwest Vermont, and other interested stakeholders would develop information and educational materials for nonprofit and municipal employers regarding the unemployment insurance system. They would have to explain the options available to nonprofit and municipal employers, which are different for them. There is So there is the regular unemployment insurance contributions, reimbursing for attributable unemployment costs, and for nonprofits, that quarterly estimated payments process, identifying potential benefits and drawbacks for each of the options, providing information on how the nonprofit or municipal employers could evaluate their potential liability under each of the options, providing information developed by the League, Common Good Vermont, United Way of Northwest Vermont, and other interested stakeholders regarding how a nonprofit or municipal employer can plan and budget for the potential expenses, since that is outside of what the department can do. And then providing additional information regarding the UI program and related laws that the commissioner determines in consultation with those entities would be helpful or necessary for nonprofit and municipal employers. Those informational materials would be made available on the department's website and in coordination with the Secretary of State and the other stakeholders I've already mentioned, be shared directly with Vermont nonprofit and municipal employers to the extent practicable. It directs the Secretary of State to assist the commissioner in identifying and contacting all active nonprofit employers in Vermont, and also making available on the Secretary of State's website a link to the information and educational materials on the department's website. So when you're registering your nonprofit, you could find the material. And then finally, the department would be required to hold one or more informational sessions to present the materials and information to nonprofit and municipal employers. The session would at least one session would have to be held on or before November 1, 2023, and allow for both in-person and remote participation, and then be recorded, with the recording being made available to the public and to stakeholder organizations to distribute. So basically, written materials, a live presentation, and the next several months spent developing these educational and outreach materials so that you can approach this through education rather than through a bonding mandate or something like that. Okay, Questions on that? About to shift
Right.
gears.
Randy, Keisha, Wendy, no, I think
No, I mean,
we're all
I will
observing.
have questions, but I think I understand what you're
Okay.
proposing now.
Yeah.
Yep. So section 5, I need to start by thanking Cameron for bringing this error to my attention. So last June, Cameron reached out to me and said, hey, I was looking at the sunset for the $60 and $25 supplemental payments. And I think you inadvertently left some money out in calculating the sunset date. And sure enough, I had. So the provision in our max unemployment benefit says that the benefit cannot go down. And we have not withstood that, if that makes sense. So we have not created an exception to that for the supplemental payments. So what happens is, so we have our $60 increase right now, but natural inflation won't cause the regular formula to catch up with it for about 2 years. So we have 2 years where the max weekly benefit is artificially high due to the $60 supplement that we created, which means that we are actually paying out more money than we would have otherwise, but the original sunset didn't count that money. So you have this, so essentially what happens to the benefits is they went up and then they're kind of going up steadily, and then there will be a plateau where we wait for the formula, which is 57% of the state average weekly wage, to catch up, and then they'll start increasing again. And during that plateau where they're artificially high, what this section does is it counts the additional money paid during that period of plateau while the benefits are artificially high, instead of omitting it from the calculation. So it just corrects an arithmetic error where it's hard to say how much is left on the table, but it would have likely been, we would have likely overspent by a few $1 million versus what was agreed to in the compromise. And so this just brings us consistent with the agreement to spend $100 million. So,
And with that new recalculation, how much sooner do we anticipate spending out that 100 million?
it is impossible to say at this point. So it may not actually have, it's hard to say what the effect will be, in part because we don't know when the IT system will take the $25 increase. So if it were to happen on July 1, 2025, which my understanding is very unlikely at this point, it would be a smaller effect than if it were to happen at a later date, because we're likely to hit the $8 million before 2025. And plus the other piece is that we always have this delay before we reset on July 1st. So unless it happens right on June 30th, there will be another gap in there. And so it's really hard to say when that's going to be. We don't know what the economic outlook is. This could, there's so many variables that it could shave a year off, or it could have no timing effect at all because it's just changing by a matter of months.
Wendy, this is the supplemental benefit that we created in this committee to balance the benefit that employers were getting, and it mattered very much to our former chair. We could really just call this the Sirotkin supplement, but it was, I'm smiling, but it's true, that it really was fair to have workers benefit as well as employers from, I think that's, there's something else you can
And the
add.
important thing to understand is, in an ideal world, all of these changes would occur in real time.
Yes, but they
The
said
reality is our mainframe
it's so screwed.
is ancient
Yeah.
from a computing standpoint. And it is so difficult to work with that we are stuck with these rigid we have very few levers we can pull. The only one we can pull right now is the max weekly benefit. And even doing that once a year causes sort of cascade of other issues within the software that need to be corrected. So trying to do, so even if we not withstood the statute to allow for a real-time change in that, we're potentially seeing other issues, and we could do that. We could not withstand the max, but you're potentially causing other issues. And then the $25 change in the actual benefit formula, we literally cannot change the underlying benefit formula that affects individuals. We can just move the max right now because nobody knows exactly what in the 250,000 pages of code or something, or lines of
It was
code.
huge.
So, yeah, so we have an enormous amount of code, and the people who wrote it are either retired or dead at this
Or
point.
dead.
And they didn't document what was where. So, and it's a coding language that is 60, 70 years old at this point. So it's a legacy system that's causing a lot of problems. So our issue here is we're stuck with these really rigid processes until the department's new system can get implemented, but that's a multi-year process, because we weren't the only state that realized that running a legacy UI system was a problem during the pandemic. And to be fair, the department had been trying for years before that to try to develop a new system through the program the federal government had pushed, which required us to partner with other states. The problem is every state's unemployment insurance program is unique. So you can imagine when you're trying to partner with other states, those relationships were challenging, and unfortunately, both efforts didn't result in a product that actually made it to the finish line and could be implemented in Vermont. And so now we're doing it on our own. Cameron can talk more about that, but it's a long-term process, and it's unlikely to bear fruit necessary to change the weekly benefit by the July 1, 2025 deadline that we had set in last year's legislation, just because of how long that process is taking, particularly since the vendors in this area have dozens of states looking for their services. And as you might imagine, it's not a very, very big field within IT development.
So it's very frustrating. And
Yes.
By the time we roll it out, they won't even use it.
So these dates, the June 30th that you have in here, 2025?
Yeah, so the June 30th, 2025 will likely need to be updated at some point. So that date, maybe not, but we will need to take a look at the underlying Act 183. Probably next year, we'll need to revisit that to update it based on the latest projections from the department.
Anyway, it's been
Okay,
an
thank
ongoing
you.
frustration,
Thank
which
you.
was
Yeah.
a great idea, which sadly can't be implemented in any time that has
Yeah,
any
and-
impact on anybody.
And this is after we already had the federal government tell us our first effort was out of compliance with federal requirements.
Oh.
So we already had one that took something like 4 or 5 months for the federal government to finally give us a conclusive answer. And then we found out that we were out of compliance and had to scramble to make changes to get ourselves back in compliance. And then this was the compromise that came out of that.
Right, so this is the technical error cleanup here. in
That's
section
right
one.
now, it's just a technical cleanup to get the arithmetic right. Section 6 is the study of the unemployment for urgent, compelling, or necessitous circumstances. And it would just really study the potential impact of extending eligibility to individuals who separate for those sorts of circumstances, including the individual's injury or illness, to obtain or recover from medical treatment, escape domestic or sexual violence, care for a child following an unexpected loss of child care, or care for an ill or injured family member. That's an inclusive, not exclusive list. So there could be other things. So that could be added to that list. And then the details of the report include looking at which states have implemented some of these or all of these circumstances. What's the information available? Are they using a waiting period? And then an estimate of the projected range of additional claims that we would have and how that would impact our trust fund. And then any recommendations based on all of that for legislative action.
So as I recall, this is the section that Emma was encouraging us to actually act on rather than create a report.
If there's, yeah, I think she said, check back in with the department and JFO to see if they have a better sense at this point and we don't need a report.
So duly noted, Pam.
And then can I ask a question just about the, when someone, what's the word that we use, who separate from employment? So that's a specific line, an action that happens at a particular time and you're no longer an employee. And that's what kicks you into unemployment.
Potentially. So there are a number of reasons why you might not be eligible for unemployment.
Right, okay, I understand.
And so many of these are currently viewed as separation from unemployment without good cause. So the right now, if you lose your job because of a medical condition, your own medical condition, you can be eligible for unemployment after you've recovered and you're able and available to work. There is a 1-week disqualification period right now. This would eliminate that or the original proposal was to eliminate that disqualification period. And this is going to look at states that have done that. The other conditions right now are not covered in Vermont, but they are covered in some other states. And so to the extent there might be information available about the impact in those states, that's what this report is looking for. So I think the discussion in the House was really without knowing the impact on the trust fund and the amount that these benefits are used, it's hard to make a policy decision about whether.
That's what we're being encouraged to. So
Right.
We're
Okay.
scheduled to take a break at 10:15. I would love to get us, if we can, to finish the talking through that.
Yep, we're on the last section, I think.
We are
Oh,
on
2
page
sections. So
19, now we're,
yep, so section 7 is a report on utilization of the Domestic and Sexual Violence Survivors Transitional Employment Program. And so it looks at utilization over the last 10 years, summary of the department's efforts to make members of the public more aware and to improve access, how the identified changes have impacted utilization, and any potential ways to further increase awareness, plus suggestions for legislative action if necessary to improve awareness or utilization. And then section 8 is directing the department to take reasonable measures to provide information to the public about the Domestic and Sexual Violence Survivors Program. And this is actually adding a new section to that statute, which is why you see it just referencing the program, because it's already a defined term within that chapter. And to provide timely materials to public agencies of the state and organizations that work with domestic and sexual violence survivors, including law enforcement, state's attorneys, community justice, Center for Crime Victim Services, the network, and any others deemed appropriate by the commissioner in consultation with the network. And so that's basically an
sorry, I don't see where you're reading.
I'm sorry, this is page 21, section 8.
Yeah, I know I'm there, and I guess I'm just,
I'm paraphrasing a little bit.
okay, thank you. I was-
So the gist of this is direction for the department to take measures to work with nonprofits and public sector entities to basically make additional people aware that this program exists to help drive up utilization. And Cameron can speak to the extent to which this is already happening and the extent to which this might expand that. But this is just codifying that directive. And then section 9 is the effective dates. Essentially, everything takes effect on July 1 of this year, except for section 2, which expands coverage to the smaller nonprofits, and that's July 1 of next year. So there's a 1-year delay on that to allow nonprofits to plan.
So I just have a question on section 8, which is if we're driving people to use this fund, what is the source of income for that fund and how are we affecting the fund? Because it needs to grow if it's only $25,000.
Yeah, and I would direct those questions to
Okay,
Cameron.
so when we come back, Cam, are you ready to chat about that? Any questions on the walkthrough that we have just gone through? Keisha or Randy? Anything from either of you up there? Okay. I would then, any other thoughts as we frame this up for discussion, Damian?
No, I think that was pretty in-depth walkthrough.
Yeah, no, between you and Emma, this was terrific. It was
So
great.
yeah, I would defer to your advocates who will give you
Okay.
more.
And I think we have somebody from
Yeah.
Common Good. Could you remind us of your name?
Emma Paradise.
That's right, Emma Paradise. Love you. Have this fabulous name. It's fine. Anyway. So maybe if you'd be willing, I think let's just take our break now and start again in 10 minutes at like 10:20. Does that sound good? Or do people need longer?
Yeah, it's great to have a break.
Okay, yeah, well, and so let's start again at 10:20 and then we'll start with, I think Cam and Kelly, and then Emma, let's have some time if we can to chat with you and or you could come back at another point.
Sure, either way is fine.
Are we, well, yikes, this is awkward. This is sort of funny. So, okay, let's do that. We'll come back.